on, or?
Yeah, so I'm gonna get you guys started, okay? I'm gonna mute myself now and broadcast you. All right,
Okay.
here we go.
Great.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, we are live. Give me a second.
Okay, and roughly how many students are we waiting for? Like 25?
About 20 to 25, but so far we have some trickling
Okay.
in.
What
Great.
kind
So,
of age,
okay.
what age group students you have?
This is 8th grade today.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Okay, welcome.
That's about 12, 14 years old?
Yes.
Okay.
Great. Well, welcome to all the students who are coming in. We'll give it just about another minute or so. It looks like about half of you are here. Welcome, everybody. We're happy to have you. Hope you had a nice weekend. And it looks like we had 11. We're now at 10. Somebody dropped out. We'll just give it another minute or so. In the meantime, I want to welcome you all to our virtual program. And for those of you who have not been to our museum before, you can see it behind me in my virtual background. If you know where the Grove is in Los Angeles, we're right across from the Grove. And we're happy to be able to do this. Well, I just opened something. Okay, we're gonna get started now. So for those of you, I think you might have all heard that, but welcome to our program through Los Angeles Museum of the Holocaust. For those of you who have not been to our museum, you can see it behind me. This museum is located in Pan Pacific Park, which is across the street from the Grove in Los Angeles. Today, you have the honor and privilege of listening to Louise Lerner, a Holocaust survivor from France, who will share her story with you. And afterwards or during, you can type in questions in the Q&A box, but I will read the questions to her after the talk. So feel free to type in a question during, but if it's something that you think she might answer a little later on, you can just hold the question. And once after she shares her story, you we'll do the Q&A. So please join me in welcoming Lerner. Louise, you can start now.
Okay. As Michael said, my name is Louise Lerner. I was born in Paris in 1938, just 2 years before the start of the war. My parents were born in Warsaw, Poland, and they came to Paris, got married there, and there they are. That is me, long time ago. Yeah, so as I said, they were Polish citizens living in France. And although when the war started, my father, still being a Polish citizen, volunteered into the French army. And he was, when the French army surrendered, he was prisoner of war in Germany. But although they knew he was Jewish, he was wearing the French uniform, and therefore he was treated as a French soldier, and thank God he survived. And so I had a brother who was 8 years older than me, So my mother, with my brother and myself, ran away from Paris, and we escaped south and ended up in Toulouse, which was a town in the south of France that was then under the independent regime of Maréchal Pétain, who was a French general, but he was allied with Hitler. So we were living in a two-room enclosure. Oh, can't remember the name. Anyhow, we were living in Toulouse, and as I say, when the war started, I was just 2 years old. So what I remember from the war, what happened when I was 5 years old in 1943. At that time, as I say, the south of France, which was in the beginning under the authority of Maréchal Pétain, surrendered, and all France was under the regime and authority of the Nazis. So the Nazis, of course, were surrounding the Jews and deporting them. So what I remember in 1943 was one evening, obviously my mother must have been told that the Nazis were going to come for us. So as I say, we were living in just a two-room living space, and it was a compound. So there were units on the ground floor and 2 units on the upper floor. We were living in one of the units on the upper floor. So that evening, when we were told that the Nazis were coming for us, we were sitting in the dark with our packs left, just sitting, waiting for the Germans to come. Well, the Nazis came into the compound, checked all the units on the ground floor, and we were obviously there sitting in the dark and in silence, and they didn't come on the upper floor. So after that, the French resistance, the underground, helped us to run away. So my next memory was to be on the train, on a train going towards the border between France and Switzerland. So we arrived at the station, and usually there is at the gate, there is a guard. Well, lucky for us, the guard was not there, and we passed through and went out of the railway station where somebody from the French underground was waiting for us. So he took us to his house and until the evening. And so when the night was starting, we came and we started walking towards the border between France and Switzerland. Well, we were walking of course, in silence, and we arrived at the border, barbed wire, and we were in the process of putting our things on the other side of the barbed wire when a guard stopped us. Halt. Well, luckily it was a Swiss German guarding the border. By that time, of course, the French person from the French underground had run away because the laws were saying that the refugees must come alone. And of course, my mother swore that we came there alone. And the guard was reluctant to let us in. until my mother bargained with him and the supervisor came, and finally they allowed us in. I must say that there was also a law saying that in 1943 there were already a lot of refugees in Switzerland, so they had passed a law saying that only families with children under 6 would allowed in. Well, I was 5 years old. So they allowed us in, and we reached the guard place, and I guess we went into a refugee camp. But what happened is that my next memory was to be in a hospital isolation room. I obviously must have had one of those contagious sicknesses that children have. And I was there, as I say, in the hospital room, and isolation. And, you know, in front of me, there is a partition with glass on top. And I saw my mother coming to say goodbye to me. The Red Cross was the organization responsible for refugees. And it was the policy of all families were separated. Children, one child going here, another child going there, the mother went there. So, as I say, so my mother came to say goodbye to me. And my next memory was again to be in a train, in the railways. I must have, of course, I was okay. And I was on my way. I ended up in Locarno, where a couple of Swiss offered to take me in, Ernesto and Vichy Bernasconi. They didn't have children, and so they took me in, and they became like my mother and my father. Of course, I had to learn to speak Italian, because in Locarno, it was the Italian part of Switzerland. And as I said, they became my father and my mother. When I was 6 years old, I started school in Locarno, and I was, as I said, I had there a family, an addition of a father and mother. I had grandparents, uncle, cousins. I had a whole family. And I lived with them for 4 years. There were 4 happy years of my life. Although I must say, at the end of 2 years, the war ended. My father,
Unknown caller.
who was prisoner of war in Germany, came back to Paris, but they had to start again from scratch. And so my mother came back to Paris, and I understand my brother too. But because I was with such a wonderful family, and I was so well, I stayed on for another 2 years. So that it was in 1947 when I came back to Paris, and I was at that time 9 years old. To leave the Bernasconi had been a very, as I said, they were like my father and my mother, was very painful. But I had to go. So I came to Paris to my parents, and imagine, I had even forgotten to speak French. My father left when I was 2 years old, so I I had no recollection of him, and I had been separated from my mother and brother for 4 years, and at that young age also, the reunion was difficult. Anyhow, my mother, of course, put me back to school in Paris. And also in school, I had been going to school in Locarno. It was different. I had to learn, had to adapt to my new environment. One of the memories I remember was one day I was in class and there was a grammar test. And of course, I had no idea what to do. So I tried to copy from the one sitting beside me. And of course, my teacher caught me, took me to the headmistress. But again, I found such a understanding and wonderful headmistress. She understood my plight and she helped me a lot. And so I managed to finish the class and pass to the next year. And I became accustomed and it was okay. And in France, so when I reached 11 years old, in France, we had a choice that if one wants to go to secondary school, one has to go sit an entrance examination. Or if not, you can continue in primary school until the age of 14. Well, I chose to go to secondary school. So I sat examination and I passed and I started secondary school in Paris. I enjoyed it. It was good, especially in the second year. I had a wonderful history teacher. And now in Paris, you go to school Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Thursday is free, so there are different activities, cultural or gymnastic or sports. And then we go back to school Thursday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Thursday is free. Friday, go back to school. Thursday and Friday half day. No, okay, sorry. No, Saturday half day. Anyhow, in my second year, I had a wonderful history teacher. And on Thursday, which was our day of some activities, she organized tours, visits into different areas of Paris. Now, Paris is a city 2,000 years old, so of course it has a lot of activity of history, different areas where things happen and so on. It was very interesting, and I got to know Paris that way, and I love history, I guess, from that time on. I am very much interested in history. I even, if you have read the book, The Three Musketeers, there is a famous center where they fought their duel, and we visited them, Place des Vosges. Anyhow, it was, as I say, it was wonderful. Anyhow, internationally also, I must say, as you know, I am Jewish, and my parents put me in contact with a Jewish youth organization, so that on Sundays I would go to my meetings with other Jewish young people, and that's where I learn, and I start to learn what it is to be Jewish, because, well, as I say, the war was, and also I must state the family in Switzerland were Roman Catholics, and I used to go with them to Mass every Sunday morning. But they never tried to push me into Christianity. No, they respected the fact that I am Jewish. My parents were still alive, and whatever decision I would take about my religion would be mine when I was grown up. They never tried to influence me, and I respect that very much. Anyhow, so I am back, and as I say, living in Paris at that time. Internationally, it was the time of the Cold War, a lot of tension between Russia, the Soviet Union, and the United States. And my father, having been a prisoner of war for 5 years during World War II, was afraid that France would become the battleground for World War III. So I had an aunt living in Buenos Aires, Argentina. This aunt was my mother's sister, and obviously she must have been living there for a long time, long before the war. Anyhow, my parents contacted her, decided to migrate to Argentina. And of course, I was informed of that only at the very last moment. But again, I had to leave France and go with them and go, all of us, to Argentina. To go from France to Argentina, at that time, on a ship, and it was a 2 weeks transit. And I was 14 years old at that time. And what I remember is that I learned to dance that's when I learned to dance, because on the boat there was, of course, dancing every evening. Anyhow, so I arrived in Buenos Aires. We started with my uncle and aunt and uncle until we found an apartment in Buenos Aires. And of course, again, I had to learn how to speak Spanish. And in order to be able to go to school and continue with my education. So I did that. I had to pass an examination to show that at what level I was, and that I could speak the language. And so I started the secondary school in Buenos Aires. And so I went. So I was going to school during weekdays, as usual. On weekends, I again contacted a youth Jewish organization. And it was a Zionist organization. And the purpose was that we reach a certain stage and we migrate to go to Israel to live in a kibbutz. A kibbutz are communal farms. And so I finished my secondary school. And in this Jewish organization, we had a communal farm outside of Buenos Aires in order to prepare ourselves how to live in Israel in a community. So I went there and I spent about, 9 months. But at the end of it, I just decided that that was not really the life I wanted. And so I left the organization and decided to continue my studies. The good thing in Argentina is that the university is free. We don't pay tuition. So, and I don't think that my parents would have been able to pay that. My parents were humble people. My father was just a tailor, and my mother would help him with the handwork, the finishing by hand of the work he was doing. So I was able, as I said, to go to university, and I chose to study architecture. So I started this at university. Architecture in Buenos Aires is a 6 years course. And so I was going to university, enjoying it. While in the meantime, again in Argentina, there was a lot of anti-Semitism. And especially at one time, a famous German Nazi general, Adolf Eichmann, who had survived in Germany and escaped and managed to enter Argentina. Of course, there was a whole surge of anti-Semitism at that time, and the Israeli intelligence service, of course, knew of it. So they came to Argentina, to find Eichmann, found him, and took him out of Argentina back to Israel, where they put him on trial and, of course, accused him. He was accused of many crimes. And in Israel at that time, I don't know if there is no death penalty, but they made an exception for Eichmann, and he was hanged. So that's for Eichmann. So I was in Buenos Aires. I was on my 4th year, and also I decided that Argentina was not really the place where I wanted to stay. I found that as a Jew, I would not have been able really to work in my profession. So I decided that I was going to go to Israel. Luckily, I had an uncle living in Israel. This uncle was the only surviving brother of my father. And of course, my parents had been in touch with him all the time. So I made contact with him. And so I decided I migrated to Israel. And my uncle, of course, was my contact in Israel. And I registered also at the Technion, which is the Technological University of Israel, where the Faculty of Architecture was located. And I registered there in order to complete my studies in architecture. Of course, again, I had to go first to learn the language. So I went to an intensive course of 4 months to learn the basic language, Hebrew, and I managed, and then I went on to the university to complete my studies of architecture. At that time, there was a campus on the hillside above Haifa. And I stayed on, while I was studying, I stayed on campus. And that's where I met what was then a student of engineering from Jamaica. Now, Israel had arranged a course for students in developing countries coming to study in Israel. And so there were students from different countries, Guyana, Jamaica, Nigeria, Ethiopia, Laos, and others. Anyhow, so we were on campus, and that's when I met the students from Jamaica, and we had a relationship and decided to get married. And so when he finished 1 year after me his studies of engineering, and of course he had to go back to Jamaica, and so I went to Jamaica with him. So I arrived in Jamaica. I registered. I became a resident of Jamaica, and I was registered as an architect, and I started working as an architect in Jamaica. I started working first at the Ministry of Construction and Works, and there I was the first female architect there. But and then I left the government. I started working on my own, and I have been working in Jamaica until 2 years ago, where I became old enough to retire. And well, in Jamaica I had a daughter, and my daughter, of course, studied in Jamaica, elementary school, secondary school, and then she decided that she wanted to become an interior designer. And there was no such school in Jamaica. So that's when she came to Los Angeles and registered at UCLA. And when she finished her studies, she remained in Los Angeles. She got married here, so that when the time came for me to retire, I came here, and here I am. That's it.
Okay, thank you so much, Louise, for sharing your story with us. As a reminder, we have a few questions already, but if anybody would like to type in the Q&A box any questions that you have, the first question we have is going back to earlier in your story when you said your mother said goodbye to you.
Yes.
Can you elaborate on that and what, why she did and what you think she was feeling at that time?
What she was what?
What she was feeling or what she was thinking at
feeling,
that
yes.
time? Yeah.
Oh, yes. Okay. As I said, at that time I was in the hospital. Obviously, I had caught a contagious sickness, so I was in an isolation room. As I said, in Switzerland, it was the Red Cross who was in charge of refugees. And the policy of the Red Cross was not to keep the families together, so that every one of us was sent in different direction. So that's why I ended up with that couple in Locarno. My mother, I don't know where she went. We never sat down and shared memories of what happened during the war. So I don't know where she went, but obviously she was with older people, and my brother was sent into an orphanage run by nuns. So, and again, he never told me about it. That's all what I know about it. So we never sat and shared memories of what happened during the war. It's unfortunate, and right now I am very sorry, but this is what happened. We never talked.
Okay, thank you. Feel free to type in more questions to the students. And Louise, I have some questions for you. When you were living in Jamaica, and you lived in Jamaica for many years, just until up
Yes.
until about 2 years ago. Did you ever share your story with anybody in Jamaica, or is this something you ever talked about there to anybody you knew?
Well, funny enough, in Jamaica, nobody asked me. In Jamaica, the Jews have a different history. The Jews came to Jamaica with Cristobal Colon in 14, almost 15,000, 1,500 of this. So it's more than it's so many years ago. There was the Jews established a lot of different places in Jamaica, and little by little, of course, that community is getting smaller and smaller. So now there used to be synagogues all over the island, and now there is only one in Jamaica, in Kingston. And I used to go regularly to the services at the synagogue in Kingston. But funny enough, no, I never sat down and told the story that I am telling here. I never told in Jamaica.
And I just want to share with the students that we met Louise at the museum through another survivor who used to speak at our museum. Unfortunately, he passed away 2 years ago, but he met Louise and told us that we should contact her, and thanks to him, Louise,
Yeah.
she was speaking at our museum at least about once a week, and since we've been closed, she's
Yeah.
now doing these virtual talks. But
Yes.
yeah, and the reason I asked that, it's important to keep in mind, a lot of survivors had not really, especially depending on where you lived, if nobody was really asked, you never thought to really mention it. So we're very glad that you do this.
Absolutely. In Jamaica, as I say, the Jewish community, they have two different branches, the Ashkenazim and the Sephardim. Ashkenazim are the Jews mostly from Europe. And the Sephardim are mostly Jews from Persia, Iran, North Africa, different traditions and different history, different past, so that no, really, we never talked. We never shared memories.
And so after this experience, you never talked with your parents, as you mentioned, and you never talked with your brother either.
Correct.
Did you ever want to talk about it with them, or was that even something you just never really thought about?
It's yes and no. I remember once in Paris with my brother. My brother came and said, "Come, let us meet and let us sit down and talk." And it never happened. We never did it. So now that I am talking to groups like today, I am so sorry that I never had this opportunity to talk to my parents, talk to my brother, share memories, but it just never happened. And now the only thing I can share is regrets.
And do you think it was just too difficult to share these memories?
Yes.
Or yeah. So that's
difficult.
also why you never shared them together with your family.
It was just too painful. Yeah. And somehow, obviously, I don't know, I guess we wanted to leave that behind us and to go forward. But I regret very much that I never had this opportunity to shared memories. And funny enough, I have spoken with other survivors, and they also share the same experience of not talking, of regretting not having talked and shared memories. But it's not only me and my parents. Apparently, it's a very frequent attitude of survivors with their families.
When your father was a prisoner of war, do you know where he was?
No, I only know that he was in Germany, but I don't know exactly where. I don't know. Again, as I say, my father never talked. The only thing he shared is that because, of course, he spoke Yiddish, and Yiddish is so closely related to German, he was interpreting from the Germans to his companions, to the French Germans, so that he was interpreting with them. That's the only thing he ever told me about his years in Germany.
And for those students who don't know, Yiddish is like the Jewish language that was spoken throughout Europe. We have a comment here. This class says thank you very much, and some of the students have to go to another class right now, but they just want to thank you so much for sharing your story. And of course, I thank you very much as well, Louise. So we thank you so much for this morning.
Whenever, as you say, whenever I can, I will. Yeah, thank you. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Bye.